Hey, so who are you?
Hi, my name is Joe Chapa. I'm an instructor of philosophy at the U.S. Air Force Academy.
Well, welcome to Rome.
Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Why don't we start by asking you what's the background here? What is the story that you're talking about?
Yeah, so I'm using it as a case study, an historical example. In 2011, the United States government targeted and killed Anwar al-Awlaki in Yemen. Anwar al-Awlaki is a U.S. citizen by birth in New Mexico, so that was the first time, to anyone's knowledge, that the United States had gone out and targeted and killed a U.S. citizen on purpose. So I'm using that as a case study to kind of evaluate what do we think the limits of citizenship are here. Is that within the purview of the federal government to kill a citizen without trial?
Okay, thanks. And then you got a somewhat complicated poster here, but it looks like the legal problem at the beginning is pretty important. So can you sort of walk us through what's the problem?
Yeah, so on the surface, what we can see pretty readily is that as a U.S. citizen, he's afforded a legal right to trial. Nevertheless, if he's Anwar al-Awlaki is claimed to have been conducting lethal attacks against the United States or leading lethal attacks against the United States. So insofar as the President of the United States has a legal duty to defend you and me against foreign threats, he also has a legal duty to afford a right of trial to a U.S. citizen, and in this case we can't do both at the same time. So we've got this legal problem because on the one hand we have a right to target him as a combatant, we have a duty to defend U.S. citizens, but he has a right to be afforded trial. So it seems that on the surface, at least legally, these duties are irreconcilable with one another.
Wow, that's a tough problem. So what's your take on the problem?
Yeah, so what I did is I looked at a couple different, we could have looked at many, but I looked at a couple different accounts of what makes for citizenship. How do we ground the legal conception of citizenship? So I'm using especially Richard Vernon and Matthias Risse. So Richard Vernon says that states coalesce when people work together to mitigate antecedent risks, things like a Hobbesian state of war, all against all. We've come together to avoid that, and in so doing we increase the risks after the fact, if you will. So one of the things that we produce as states is taxes. That's bad. We've let the government monopolize violence. There's a danger in that. We've produced this risk as we come together. And so we can look at Anwar al-Awlaki compared to that and say what happened when he left the United States, went to Yemen, and started prosecuting attacks against the United States. Well, he not only ceased to mitigate those risks, he actually added to those antecedent risks, the risks against United States persons from outside. So on Risse's view, or correction, on Vernon's view, we might be able to say that Anwar al-Awlaki is no longer a U.S. citizen, at least morally or politically speaking, not legally but politically.
And would the main reason on that account be because he was actively attacking or leading attacks against the United States, or would it be sufficient to say that he had left? I mean, is that enough?
Right. This is a hard question. So I think the reason Vernon's view is helpful or more interesting is because it's both. So we can make a strong case because he not only left and ceased contributing, but he actually increased the harms or the risk of harm.
Okay, so Vernon wouldn't be committed to the view that everybody who leaves
on
a 2-week vacation is suddenly fair game.
I don't think so.
Okay.
But I think on Risse's view, we're closer to that.
Okay, so let's move on to Risse's view.
Okay, yeah. So Risse claims that there's two things that are required in order for states to coalesce. One is that the immediacy of the state's legal and political coercion on its people. So the fact that the United States government has this immediate relationship, coercive relationship with the people, we can be compelled to pay taxes, things like that. That's one element. And then in addition, the intensity of the members' participation in the renewal of the state. So as we participate to make the state continue and renew and become better, then we've coalesced as a state. So in this case, when Anwar al-Awlaki left the country, it may be the case that just by leaving, he ceased to participate in that reproduction of the state, and then he no longer has this political claim on citizenship. And this is troubling, because we can imagine a case where someone says, hey, I'm going to go to Europe for 4 months. Well, does that mean for those 4 months they're no longer a U.S. citizen on political term? That seems odd. Even if we go farther to say a person says, hey, I want to live outside the United States for the rest of my life. Well, they can still vote, they can still pay taxes, they're still U.S. citizens legally speaking. Do we really want to say that they've abdicated their citizenship in a meaningful way? I think not. So what the al-Awlaki case does here is kind of shed some light on maybe some short-sightedness in a few of these views. Obviously, when these books were written, there was no al-Awlaki case, so we can use that going forward as we construct future explanations of what citizenship is.
All right, so let's go forward a little bit then here. So you've talked us through Vernon's and Risse's view. So what do you make of all this in the end?
Right, so I'd like to point out that one appeal to U.S. law, so in the beginning we said that U.S. law is insufficient to handle this case. There's one obscure U.S. law that might be of some help. So Title 8, Section 1481 of the U.S. Code says that if a U.S. person takes up arms in a foreign state that's engaged in hostilities against the United States, their citizenship can be taken from them. well, we haven't quite met that standard because Al-Qaeda is not an enemy state. It's a non-state actor. So if we looked at that and said, okay, Anwar al-Awlaki doesn't meet this standard, then maybe the law is still insufficient, even given this caveat, to solve the problem. So I think what we might end up having to say is that, legally speaking, the executive branch of the U.S. government wasn't in a position to prosecute this attack. It failed to acknowledge and fulfill Anwar al-Awlaki's legal right to trial. Nevertheless, if the President of the United States or the executive branch of the United States has a moral duty to defend the people of the United States, and if in fact Anwar al-Awlaki is as bad as they say, then maybe there was an ethical mandate that they prosecute the attack. So what we're left with is this very odd case in which the actions of the President of the United States may have been ethical, may have even been ethically required, obligatory, and yet may have been illegal. So,
and illegal despite the fact that the law itself might turn out to be a justified law. Is that part of what you're...
Well, and this is the question. So what we could do is say, let's modify the law such that things like this that are ethical on behalf of the president become legal. Let's change the law so that the executive branch of government has the legal authority to deny someone's citizenship, to work based off either Rissa's or Vernon's view to say that person is no longer a citizen. I'm actually against that. So I think even though the action was ethical and illegal, that doesn't mean we should change the law. I think if we change the law to accommodate that, what we'd be left with is a really kind of scary moral hazard in which the President of the United States may be allowed or even incentivized to do bad things. Where does the executive set the threshold for what kind of action is sufficient to warrant this loss of citizenship? And I think throughout what we've seen is an absence of checks and balances, separation of powers, and that's the disconcerting thing. I'd like to get to somewhere where we can have either judicial or legislative oversight of that decision.
So it looks like then there's more than one puzzle that's kind of raised by this case then, right? Yeah,
that's right.
That's interesting. So how did the discussion go during the poster session? Were there particular kinds of questions or concerns that people raised? Were they pushing mostly in one direction or another? Did you get challenged a lot? Or what?
I did. The challenges tended to be on my premises. So I'm holding a view here in the conclusion that in wartime, wartime is a particular kind of venue in which legality and ethics often don't align, or they don't align to a greater degree or greater frequency than in domestic life. And some people wanted to challenge me on that claim. I don't think I need that presupposition in order to get to the conclusion here, but I was surprised how many people wanted to challenge that.
So sorry, could you clarify just a little bit? So the claim that they were challenging was the claim that there was any relevant difference between war and peace time as far as the relation between law and morality? Was that right?
Well, one of the things that I'm claiming is that if I hold this view that ethics and legality don't match up here, that the legal requirement doesn't conform to the ethical norm, I'm okay with that because I know that war is a place where these things often happen. They were claiming, no, war is not a place where that often happens.
So other people found your conclusion more worrisome than you did?
That's right. Right. So I recognize a tension. Some people thought that tension was too much. They weren't happy with that tension.
Got it. Were there any other particular themes or cases or?
Yeah. Well, one of the questions. My language in the conclusion is fairly soft. It's possible that the president may have acted illegally, and some people wanted to challenge me and pin me down and say, should he have done it or shouldn't he? And this has brought to my mind a distinction I really should have put on the poster, that there's, as there often are in these ethical questions, there's an ontological question and an epistemic question. So on the one hand, is Anwar al-Awlaki as bad as they say? If so, if he really did pose that significant a threat to the people of the United States, then I think the president is morally obliged to prosecute that attack. The problem is an epistemic one in that the only reason I have to believe that Anwar al-Awlaki is as bad as they say is because the executive branch told me, which is part of the problem that the executive branch in this case was judge, jury, and executioner. And so this is the difficulty. Should he have done it or not? Well, I can't answer unless I know whether Anwar al-Awlaki posed the threat that the executive claimed.
So a lot of interesting tensions arise once you think through this case. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us, and enjoy the rest of the room.
Thank you, David. Thanks for having me.
Great.